Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we're gonna go back in time once again, as you might not know this, but Games Workshop used to run their business a lot differently way back in the day. In fact, they used to be very vocal with the community and let us know in advance certain things, as there were certain people in the company who actually valued a lot of fan input, especially when it came to these things, get them hyped up early. This was the case for the Battle of Blackfire Pass. No, not the one that Sigmar fought, but actually the one that Karl Franz and Marius Leitdorf fought. That was a big part in the lore, but it never really got explored in a campaign. But this was something that was actually confirmed in 2012, I believe during Adepticon, one of the big events that Games Workshop always takes part in, and it had a lot of units that we would have seen in the future. We would have seen a lot of really cool stuff, and I want to talk about that today, as they're the units that we missed out on, but we might potentially see in both Warhammer The Old World, something I'm hoping for because there's some things that we do know would be very helpful, and finally, Total War Warhammer 3, because DLC, right? So before anything, what is the Battle of Blackfire Pass? Well, this was a very large battle fought at Blackfire Pass. Surprise, surprise with the name. But it was going to define the future of the Empire, as a rather large greenskin war led by, I believe, Vorgaz Ironjaw had been going to pretty much destroy the Empire at this point. It was going to be absolutely devastating, more so than any greenskin war had ever done. As Blackfire Pass leads to Averland, naturally the Averlanders stood up against them. A few other imperial provinces, most notably Reichland, did also lend their aid, but not only that, we had the dwarves taking part too, as any greenskin activity near their Karax is going to be a massive problem, and we know that there's a few Karax around that region which do kind of work alongside the Empire quite a bit, and the Halflings. Yeah, despite the fact that Marius Leitdorf absolutely hated Halflings, they also took part too. At least this is now part of the story that we never really got. But this was going to be another campaign supplement similar to, the Throne of Chaos that we had, the Storm of Magic, even the Monstrous Arcanum, but it was going to be something really interesting as these things always brought in new models. And we had a few confirmed, there was talks about stuff, we even got to see stuff, most of which are images that you can find online, thankfully, because people do document these things, but it's a massive shame that we never got it, one reason or another, and obviously then the end times was not too far off. They probably already started planning for the end. It's a massive shame, but you never know for the future. Like I said, we have two mediums that could very much use these units, and we know that a few of them are actually done, or at least on their casting phase. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each of the factions, and let's just talk about the units that we could have had and we might have in the future. So we'll start off with the Empire, as there's not too much to talk about there, and let's be honest, it's the Empire, we can more or less guess. What we did know is Marius Leitdorf was going to be one of the main characters here, and obviously he had a really fancy looking miniature for 8th edition. I really love his miniature, and an unnamed Jade Wizard. There were a few other things. We did see some concept art here, there, and everywhere, but it was mostly for characters, and this is generic characters that we already had anyway. Keep in mind that some stuff did get announced for this book, or attached, or near to this book, and they got released anyway, like for example the Empire Command and so on, but at that point people were just using those characters rather as anything else that they might have been intended for. I believe if memory serves, the Empire Command kit was released on Forgeworld. Well, most of this stuff is going to be Forgeworld link anyway, but it was just used as like, oh, this is another general that you can use, or a banner bearer and stuff, which was cool. The casts were amazing. There was talk of an Averland-themed army, and we don't have any details, or as far as I've been able to search online. Keep in mind that 2012 was a long time ago, and really what we could expect is something just kind of kit bash formed, in a very similar sense to how we had the Cult of Ulrich when it came to the Storm of Chaos, as stuff like that was generally quite popular. You'd see army lists like that pop up in White Dwarf every now and then. However, we do know that there were certain upgrade sprues for halberdiers and stuff, which would have been available through Forgeworld. I imagine that it would have just given them an extra armor save, going from light to heavy armor, getting you like a real proper front line, as most of the Empire stuff was light armor when it was on foot, barring, I believe, greatswords. Which kind of mirrors what happened with the Null Ironsides in the Throne of Chaos, where they were handgunners. Yeah, sure, they were a little bit better, but they had a better armor save, and that just made them a bit more durable. Mind you, when you're dealing with Chaos Warriors of Nurgle who are hitting you with great weapons, that doesn't really matter, but anything else? Yeah, as long as it's not a great weapon. Plus, if you look at it in tabletop stats, that means that the standard warriors for the Empire, if they would have had the heavy armor, would have taken them up to, what, a 4-up armor save, which is actually fairly decent. There was mention of halflings, and this is what actually piqued my interest, because halflings were a thing way back in the day, and then just quietly ignored. So this could have been the return of halflings to be able to field them as a small army, as a small detachment, kind of similar to, again, the Throne of Chaos with how the Chaos Dwarfs worked. You could field them as an army if you wanted to, but it was mostly for an allied detachment type of thing. So it would have just been updated miniatures from back in the day. You know, we had a decent-sized army list for the halflings, but yeah, updated miniatures, maybe some updated stats. They wouldn't be great anyway because halflings aren't really supposed to be able to be a good army. I mean, hell, if you were going to win with a halfling army, you might have been one of the best players ever, or just had really good luck, I guess. It's a bit of a shame more than anything because I know people do miss the halflings. There's loads of like mini factions that were attached to certain other factions, and just in general, the wanting to have more miniatures. You can play around with stuff. You can kit bash more. This is a big thing when it comes to the Warhammer hobby. And apparently there was mention of a special detachment of a trio of steam tanks. I never heard about this myself, but it's not really out of the question, considering that we do have loads of different stylized steam tanks. There was a White Dwarf article showing you all the different types. It might have been an effort to bring that back and field them as a group. Would have been a complete waste of points by 8th edition standards, unless they were just point reduced for that campaign, because steam tanks were kind of expensive and you wouldn't really bring 3 steam tanks to a normal battle. In most cases you'd bring 1, and even that's a stretch depending on what you were playing and who you were playing against. When we go to the dwarfs, this is where things get a little bit different, as we did get a decent amount of concept. For example, the Thunder Barge, the flying warship over the dwarfs. This is something that had already been in game, but not as a playable or buildable model. You could play as it, you just had to build it yourself. It was actually in the 8th edition army book, in the big red book, the rule book itself, not the army book. And yeah, it was really, really strong, so I imagine they were probably going to nerf it down a little bit, but this is something that a lot of people have been wanting for a while. It's a massive shame that we just never got our hands on this, as, well, it's cool, right? And the dwarves did need something that was kind of big Forgeworld style. Yeah, we did have the Shard Dragon, and that was closely linked to the dwarfs a lot, but it wasn't really a dwarven aesthetic, and definitely a Thunder Barge or a Zeppelin, whatever you want to call it, definitely is. Rune Golems were mentioned too, and these are gigantic constructs made by the dwarfs in a very similar way to how we've got the constructs for Grand Cafe, actually. And it's a bit of a shame because we've actually seen or heard about Rune Golems a lot of times. They had a little bit of artwork in, I believe, the Big Red Book too, but it was just like really in the distance. However, it always kind of pointed towards that. So clearly there were plans for a long, long time. And a lot of people actually did think that maybe there was going to be a point that we would have seen a second army book for the dwarfs, just to kind of flesh them out a little bit more. There were rumors about that at one point. Obviously that never happened because end times. But yeah, this would have given them a gigantic creature, well, construct with possibly a ridiculously high armor save. I'm imagining something like this would be on a 1-up armor save, similar to a steam tank, and it would be able to do a decent amount of damage, but it could also hold down enemies for a long, long time, possibly with even more movement than normal dwarfs, considering that this is a machine, and dwarfs, I believe, would move, 3 or 4 inches? Not marching, of course. There was actually some art revolving around a Master Engineer, and it looks really, really cool. I imagine that this could have been for a generic Lord or Hero option, as at that point we already had Grim Berlichson, who was a named version, so this would have probably been able to allow you just to build your own and use your own war gear, just if you wanted to create your own cheaper version of Grim Berlichson. Because if you didn't play Warhammer Fantasy back in the day, basically how it worked is named characters were incredibly overcosted, so you were better off just kind of making your own generic character and then building him up. Now, I could be wrong about this regarding this not being a named character, and it could be very possible that this could be a named character that they had planned for. Either way, with the gunship already, and obviously with the golems, we already had something really, really cool, right? And keep in mind how these books work, just like Temucon, they didn't really bring in full rosters, unless it was something like the Chaos Dwarves, but when they focused about a faction that was already there, they just did like a few units here and there, just to kind of fluff up your roster a bit more, and give you some more options to bring. They're usually overcosted, but they were usually quite strong too. Now, as a general mention, there was talk about war balloons, and this is its own little section, as it could have been for the Empire, could have been for the Dwarves. I've seen conflicting reports that it's for the Dwarves, it's for the Empire. We did have war balloons back in the day for War Master, and I believe that was for the Empire. The thing is, I don't know exactly what they could bring in to make them quite useful. As a flying artillery piece, sure, but this is the thing, right? I'm looking at it nowadays, as we already have war balloons for Grand Cafe and Total War Warhammer, and yeah, unless it's the artillery piece, the other one's just kind of useless, and it would be a bit of a shame if every war balloon was exactly the same, as I don't believe that the Empire would need it, and neither do I think that the Dwarves would need it. Once they have the Zeppelin, they'd be perfectly fine. So I wonder if that eventually just got transferred to Grand Cafe, as they kept the idea, and they're like, oh, Cafe could use this more than anyone else. But yeah, we're going to have to wait and see for the future, as I do believe that Games Workshop will be smart enough. I know I don't give them a lot of credit, but I do believe that they will be smart enough to go back and look at old plans that they had and use that going forward, as if they've got the concept art, if they've got the basic idea, they might as well use it. Whether or not it stays for the same intended faction, we'll have to wait and see. Well, we won't, because they won't generally tell us these things nowadays, as Games Workshop like to be as quiet as possible. Moving on to the greenskins, we actually had some pretty interesting information here. You see, the first thing was the mention of sea trolls, which we later found out was the giant river troll hag. It never actually got released in a book, but did have some experimental rules. We already had these in Total War, and you could realistically field them in a Warhammer Fantasy battle. I just never knew anyone who did. In fact, one of these models are very rare nowadays, as yeah, there wasn't really too much of a point. They were also kind of expensive too, 255 points for a monster, which did have a lot of really cool rules, but yeah, not worth it. There were rumours that there were going to be some other trolls, but we just never saw them, which is a massive shame, as they would have brought in some extra big monsters. But the main thing that we knew about this book is there was going to be a heavily focused on goblins, funny enough. One of them being the Night Goblin Squid Gobber, which never got a book release, again, experimental rules. Essentially, it's an artillery piece for the Night Goblins, which they never really had. We had a lot for others, because obviously we had the Rock Lobber, we had the Bolt Thrower, we had the Doom Diver Catapult, which was for Night Goblins, but this just added a little bit extra to it, and let's be honest, it's kind of cool. Like, it is very, very, very cool. Something that we don't have in Total War just yet, but it's definitely something that we did want, and it was fairly priced too in terms of points, 120. Not real money, because it was Forgeworld once again, but yeah, definitely one of those ones that you would look at and you'd think, I want one for my army. Which was nice to see that the Night Goblins were going to get a lot of attention in this book, as the Night Goblins, were very popular. Yeah, I know, it's kind of weird, but not really, considering that Fanatics were just amazing. If they actually went the right direction, they could pretty much demolish anything that was in front of them, and they were absolutely terrifying. The biggest benefit that the Greenskin book naturally had was variety, so extra variety was always fun, as I know the Greenskins were fairly popular, mostly because you could meme with them, and there was a lot of meme armies that you could build up, to be honest. It was kind of fun. Nothing fully confirmed here, but there was mention of Forest Goblins, which is something that the army book for the 8th edition had lost. Forest Goblins was something that you could field on foot too, just like regular goblins. You naturally had them in 8th edition anyway because of the Spider Riders and the Arachnarok Spider, but this would have been proper foot Forest Goblins if you wanted to field a Forest Goblin army. Now, I don't know if that was what they had planned, but it's definitely something that could have been really, really good. I know a lot of people did miss them, as, again, variety for the Greenskins was their biggest strength. You could do whatever you wanted. You could do full Savage Orc. You could go full Normal Orc. You could mix and match how you pleased, and it's what made them so good as a faction. Yeah, sure, not the most competitive, as Animosity was a really bad rule for them. It could screw you over a lot. But it was definitely something that you could just have fun with, and again, that's what you kind of want, right? You'd be surprised, but a lot of Warhammer Fantasy was not falling on the competitive scene, it was mostly just falling for fun. There was talk about Night Goblins with flaming sensors too, and this is the thing, right? A lot of the Goblins and Orc stuff, we just don't know if it's true or not. This is the problem when the announcement was done in a Adepticon. It wasn't even a proper announcement, it was more of a, hey, this is what we're kind of working on, this is a first look. There were pictures and stuff, but that's pretty much it. Now, I don't understand why the Night Goblins might have needed flame sensors, as Night Goblins generally stay away from the light. They could have been an upgrade, I guess, for regular Night Goblins, or they could have been a separate unit working very similar to how a sensor unit would work, maybe like a skirmisher, but I really do not see why or how this unit would be viable, especially for a Night Goblin list, which was already generally quite powerful. The last thing that I have seen online is multiple mentions towards big orcs, and I'm not too sure what they mean here. Could this mean that Biggins were going to finally get their own miniatures, or that we were going to get some monstrous-sized orcs? Because Biggins never had a miniature. You would just get normal orc boys, increase their point cost, and there you go, they were Biggins. You could only have one per unit. It was a pretty interesting thing, but as you can imagine, you wouldn't really generate too many sales. All you needed to do was use your same orcs. So it's possible. There's also the fact that we did get some bigger orcs in Age of Sigmar, much, much larger than the regular ones. So it could have been that those were just repurposed and we would have had orcs on 40 mil bases, or maybe even 50 mils, because these are actually fairly large. But hey, we'll have to wait and see if that ever comes into Warhammer The Old World. I don't know. I mean, it's not entirely out of the question. Again, orcs get bigger, and it's a general thing. Grimgor was quite large, even though he was only in 25 mil base. But in lore, he was actually supposed to be much, much larger. So it could have been that just we were going to get super black orcs, right? Just really, really powerful. But again, it's something that I've heard a few times, but just nothing really comes out of the woodwork from it. This is the thing with these showcases from Adepticon back then. There were so many miniatures. There were really, really cool ones. Some of them did get released, so you could buy them, which was absolutely great. I've got the Empire Command. I use them in my campaigns and stuff. I've got the Night Goblin Command too, which probably one of the better kits that's ever been released, in all honesty. But there was an Orc Command, there was a Dwarf Command too. Hell, there were even some Famir, which never got released, as far as I'm aware. We did get the Famir from the Storm of Magic, or the Monstrous Arcanum, I believe, but there were some others. Hell, there was even talk about a potential named Famir. You can see those Famir on screen right now. They look freaking awesome. Like, they look quality, right? They look really, really good. I really, really hope that Games Workshop didn't break their casts. I believe one of them is a tester model more than anything else, so it's not a proper actual print of one of the miniatures. But hey, you never know for the future. This could make big money. If Games Workshop decided to bring them out, or, you know, use them in Warhammer The Old World, hell, even for Total War DLC, because sometimes we get stuff which is linked to Forgeworld a lot, so hey, I'm just saying. Like, the collector in me is thinking there's miniatures out there that I might not own, and that really gets me there. But there's so many cool things, and I wonder what else they had planned. There's all these rumors that they had all these other things planned out, and we're going to be talking about those rumors in future videos. But this is something I really wanted to talk about because it's just so cool. And it really is sad that we never got the full story of the Battle of Blackfire Pass where Marius dies. Yeah, we do get the mention of it, and we do get a little bit of lore through the army book, but the full story would have been great, because the Forgeworld team, anyone who worked on the Forgeworld books, they wrote some great lore, let's be very, very honest. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about all this stuff in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion, and I'll see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.